The existence of St. Nicholas is historically certain. What is not certain is the details of his martyrdom or otherwise. It would seem that he was actually tortured under Diocletian, but not actually finished off, as it were. Hence we have white and not red. Because he died actually after the cessation of the main persecution in 342, it seems. He was Bishop of Myra in the present Turkey, which explains why suddenly he was removed from that area during the occupation of the Saracens, the Islamic bloc taking over Turkey bit by bit, and was put in safekeeping across the waterways there through the Mediterranean down to a port in the south of Italy, Bari, where he is very much venerated on this day. And they have a phenomenon there called the manna of St. Nicholas. It is a kind of myrrh, a sweet-smelling substance which oozes out of his body and procures miracles to this day. So you can imagine how in a place like the south of Italy, where there's a very strong faith still, there will be a huge popular devotion to him. Now, a year or two ago, something curious happened. By a spontaneous gesture of good Christian charity, they allowed the precious relics to go back for a short while to Russia, because he's patron of Russia, and they were venerated by great throngs there in that ancient land of prayer, La Sainte Russe, Holy Russia. And it was interesting to see how from grassroots, as it were, it just took off without too much fuss or bother, and he came back calmly, unharmed, to Bari. Now I just want to dwell a minute on this question of what that should mean to us. Why did that work? It worked because the simple people sort of know things, and meeting in God somehow transcends theological barriers at times. I found that very often, even actually back in Wales, praying with my Protestant brethren. In deep prayer, one somehow meets without a huge amount of fuss or bother. It just happens. That's natural ecumenism, not the artificialdom of patching up theological differences. That is actually not always safe, because actually what happens is this, if we're honest. We use words, but we are attaching different meanings to them. And that's the problem with some ecumenical dialogue. They don't mean the same as we do, using the same expressions. But I leave that for a moment to go into the other one, which does work. Prayer, authentic prayer. Now, I just want to dwell for a minute on the question of this huge block of Russia and how terribly it has suffered. Remember now, it's still carrying on, essentially in China. There's still a form of communism which is pretty atheistic. But there it was, in this very holy country, Russia, since 1917. And it did mean awful torture, labour camps, all the rest of it, and great heroes, which we will never know until we reach heaven. But some years ago, something strange happened. It was on a bus. The simple people were there, and at some point, unexpectedly, this man, who was a typical youngish communist, found that he was sitting next to a bearded man. Big, long, white beard, looking somewhat venerable. And he started to talk with him. And he was, of course, reproducing the communist doctrine of having surpassed the God dialogue. Well, this old man calmly talked to him and listened to him. And suddenly something happened. There was a massive explosion. Something went wrong on the bus, and every single person on the bus, except the young man, made 3 signs of the cross in Eastern style. And the old man calmly said to the young man, "Did you see that, young man? Everyone on the bus except you made the sign of the cross. What does that tell you?" He didn't have much to answer, but then the old man carried on. "Young man, the reign of Satan over this country is about to draw to an end." And then what happened? He disappeared. So people realized that St. Nicholas, the protector of Russia, had shared part of their journey, and indeed by doing so shown that he shared the whole of their journey and still cared from on high for this holy country, which had been under the hands of the essentially anti-Christian, anti-grace regime of Satan. But I want to zoom into one thing. The faith, in some shape or form, was able to be maintained in that country despite closure of churches practically everywhere, because of the fact that they had one thing. It was the unchanging, holy and untouchable divine liturgy, which contained the whole faith. The language contained it all, and though they could not evangelize or preach, they could, in certain circumstances, celebrate the divine liturgy. It was tolerated, and that's how it carried on. I want to make a jump. In this land, which is also known persecution of a different sort, we are now in danger of losing that faith which at great cost we have received from those who underwent all kinds of penalization for maintaining the faith. It's this. Whereas before, somehow, through word of mouth, the faith was transmitted, now we're in danger, even within the body of those who still go to church, of losing the essence even of our faith. And I mean actually the essence, e.g. belief in the real presence of the Holy Sacrifice. And the proof is this. One still finds the mentality around of people who praise a priest for getting it over with in half an hour. And the mentality that that shows betrays something profound and actually very dangerous. It means that there is religion without relationship, duty without encounter, force of habit without real love. If we really knew what was going on at the altar and what our Father suffered to have one, we would not have that attitude. I just finish with one little story. It's back to that Russian bloc. There was, a long time ago now, but it was at the height of persecution, a Russian Orthodox priest who was doing something very dangerous. He was diffusing the faith by little tracts. And his presbytera, his wife, was helping by typing them out. He was caught. I believe he was tortured and died in prison. He wouldn't talk. And they tried eventually to find the source of these tracts. And because the state owned all these typewriters in the offices, they tracked down the typewriter which had one fault on one letter. And they got then to this lady, the widow, fairly young, of this holy priest. And so she was taken and interrogated, tortured. She wouldn't speak, and they asked her why she wouldn't speak. And she said, he, meaning Jesus, will not allow me to. Eventually, they had one last solution. They had a very severe torture that they were going to apply because it was fairly efficacious, but it meant 4 men. Now, before I mention that, there's one little detail which you ought to know. There was one of her interrogators who had to carry her back to her cell after one session of interrogation. And because she could hardly walk, he took the weight of her body, and she said this to him: "May God reward you for this tenderness." And that word got through to his heart. And so when it came to this, which they were going to do, which needed his help as the 4th one, he refused to go through with it. But the only language he knew was the language of the prison guards. He got his pistol out and started to shoot at the other interrogators, who immediately shot back. He and the good lady were both caught in the crossfire, and they were dying. She, in her last breath, said, "I'm dying." And he, in his last breath, said, "Take me with you." And she extended her weak hand to his and said, holding his hand, "Come." And the martyr and her interrogator died holding hands.